Good morning, Nashville.
Good morning.
Excellent. Yes, 9:30 p.m. My bad. All right, so, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, my name is Alan Frey. This is a talk about running a hackerspace, and basically will be sort of like my thoughts on running a hackerspace based on my experiences from running Freeside Atlanta for close to 3 years. It's a little bit of info about me. There's all that stuff. Yeah, there we go. And let's get ready to bumble. As you can see, this is oddly prescient slide.
I don't think you're in any position to ask me.
So, welcome. For those of you coming in, thanks. All right. So this is how the presentation split up. What is a hackerspace? How do you hackerspace and why? How can I hackerspace faster? Daily operations, challenges, and the future, which is a vision quest.
I'm in your place, verbing your nouns.
Great. What is a hackerspace? This is a quick thing about them. Square footage, drywall, tables. Obtainium. This is scrap material for use in projects. We have plentiful of it. But most importantly, it is both a community and a culture. So the first five things are easy. You can easily obtain those things through traditional or non-traditional means. Community and culture is the two things that require work. So this is a few screenshots from Freeside, or otherwise known as photos. I like to think of them as screenshots. There we go. We have our mill. There's our 3D printers back when they were all working. Our tool room, some person soldering something. Our kitchen, and the off-road wheelchair project. As Morgan Freeman puts it, a hackerspace is a physical space where a community gathers in pursuit of personal development and culture. He really said that. Let's see. How do you hackerspace? This is a great question. Basically, you should first ask why, because why is very important and critical here. The first important thing is that it's a place for your community to trade knowledge. And physical space, shared possession, yes. And you want to improve the world in a tangible way, yes. And you like to explore and show off untapped talent and blah, blah, blah. This is all really good. This is very good reasons to hackerspace. But more importantly are good reasons why not to. Well, this is good. This is why I do it. I like to have a smorgasbord of everything geek. Although I don't like the word club. I don't like club. That's the only thing I don't like about this image. But generally everything else is more or less accurate. This is kind of important. A lot of people get into wanting to develop a hackerspace, but they realize that they don't need a physical space, but they still want one. You know, why do hackers need a lair? You know, why do you need that? You don't.
Stupid question.
Yes. You want to make money. That's actually another good one that results in failure. Usually that goes along people subsidizing your hobbies or a personal fabrication business. But most importantly, you think that it's easy. These are all terrible reasons to get into this. This is a great illustration of how not to hackerspace. If anyone's seen that, that's one of my favorite movies. So this is more or less how Freeside got started, but this is actually a pretty common template throughout all hackerspaces. Is that at first, you build the community first. So this is before you even go and look at a space, this is before you register a business, this is before you even think about anything. Just go ahead and build a community of people. And a good idea is to do it once a week, because that once a week meeting is going to translate directly into your once a week open house that you're going to have at your hackerspace, which is going to bring in more people, more and more people into your community. So I think bars are good. A lot of people do tabletop gaming at bars. Those are excellent places. And for God's sake, tip well, okay? Like if you forget everything in this presentation, remember to tip well, because that's paramount. Other good places would be basically anywhere that you can see yourself playing tabletop games, you should do it here, because making is a form of play, and you need a lot of room. And it's good to have large, wide tables and wooden surroundings, those also. Sacrifices that. Okay, so you're starting a business. You actually need a plan. So even though it's a nonprofit, you need to come up with an idea of how you will generate revenue and so forth. I recommend the route of immediately going for 501c3. A lot of places decide not to go that route. They'll incorporate it as an LLC or do some other kind of weird things in order to say, hey, I'm going to start up this space this way, and then we'll turn it into a nonprofit. No, just commit and do it. Because again, if you go for profit, you're going to have lots of fun. And so don't do that. 3 to 6 months of operating costs. I mean, this is pretty much like if you go to SBA.gov and, the government's going to tell you how to start a business, they'll tell you this stuff. And that's pretty easy, And then this one is very key, though. This is worse than marital arguments, where the space will be located. This is awful. And this will bring out the worst in people. So this is, these are completely anecdotal and made up, but they're made up based on facts. And this is stuff that I've surveyed on many different hacker spaces, not only in the Southeast, but also just throughout the US. I don't know that this applies to European hacker spaces, but at least in America, 20 to 25 founding members is the bare minimum across the board. I talked to different founders and they pretty much say, yeah, it was about 24 people every time. And that's for a small space. For a much larger space, the number tends to hover around 50. And those seem to be pretty fixed numbers. And I think there's good reason for that. But that gets into what are called the magic numbers in groups. So there's 7, 30, and 150. 150 being Dunbar's number, which is the largest number of a tribe where everybody knows everybody else. And 30 being the number of people that are most familiar with one another. And 7 being the people that you can reliably communicate to on a regular basis. So that ends up completely translating here. As you can see, if you have a core group of 7 people, and those people in turn communicate to 7 people, that tops out at around 49. So that's how you get these numbers in this kind of distribution. So that makes sense. It squares with the knowledge, but again, this is completely anecdotal. It's just what I surveyed. And also expect 1/3 to 2/3 of the community to drop out once you set the location. So if you remember that horrible argument, you didn't locate it next to my house like I wanted, so I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. That's what happens. And pretty much you need to plan for that. So if you're going to open a large space of about 10K square feet, and you have your 50 members, ask yourself, can I pay the rent with 25 members? Pretty much. That's kind of what I would recommend. Yeah. So this isn't so much about doing this faster, but really what kind of stuff goes wrong. And things can go wrong for any number of reasons, but mostly it's lack of rules, lack of really getting participation with people, and lack of good leaders just putting their feet down on a variety of topics. So one of the biggest reasons is that you'll get a really cool tool like a 3D printer, and it will break, as 3D printers are wont to do. So no one will go and repair the 3D printer. So now you have a critical piece of your hackerspace infrastructure that's completely broken. And Same goes with any other large expensive tool. You'll say, well, I don't know, I can't really get this repaired. So that's an issue. Do you have enough basic tools? We used to joke at Freeside, one of our taglines was, we almost have everything you need to complete your project, because you'll need like that one bit, and we'll have like 16 bits, but bit number 15 is missing, so you can't actually drill that thing in. So that's kind of like very important and kind of overlooked. So these are just basics. Cleanliness is really important. The reason it's important to keep it clean is not because that keeps the roaches and the beta critter away, but really because this is what attracts people to the space. If they come and see a clean space, they'll feel like they can work there. If they come and see a dirty space, they'll think, I just have to go and clean this. Maybe, some people. Let's see. Room for projects is the same kind of thing. If people walk into a space and it's too cluttered, then they're gonna say, well, I don't know if I can work on that cool thing I wanted to here. All the members current on dues, how are your year-to-date revenues and expenses? What is your membership gain loss trend? If you ask people whose hackerspaces are failing these questions, they will not know the answer. And this is just basic accounting. This goes beyond just bookkeeping. This is like, hey, collect stats. Like, a Google spreadsheet is cheap. It literally costs you nothing. So start recording everything. Start recording how often members sneeze. You know, like just whatever you want to collect, just collect it. You don't even know if it's going to be important, just do it. And enforcing the rules, this is very important. It's not dumb, you know, we are civilized, we can do this. Here's some quick fixes for all sorts of things. But basically, what this is arranging of incentives. What you're doing when you're managing a hackerspace, which is a distributed space of people working on varying products with varying interests and varying degrees of cleanliness, organization, and knowledge, is you're manipulating incentives. So you're trying to play with different variables to get people to do the right thing and sort of migrate the herd in a direction without really worrying too much about individuals. So what is it actually like, though, to run a hackerspace? You know, there's some level of facilities management involved, as you can see. There's finances.
Movement, good choice.
And then events. If anyone's seen Community, it's like my favorite scene ever. It's once more with feeling. Matt knows this. Matt just walked in. You know this film, right? You know this feel? Okay, good. So challenges to running the space. So again, right, incentives. So one thing that, you know, when you have a mailing list, you know those threads that have like 300 messages? This was one of them. Like, what works? Paid versus free classes, you know? But if it's free, everyone will just consume as much of it as possible. And I'm like, well, can you see how that's not necessarily a good thing sometimes? This doesn't work for a number of reasons. The most interesting thing was the argument that if it's free, people will take as much of it as possible. It's true for candy, but it's not true for education. So what actually happens is that nobody comes to a free class. How can this be? You know, it's free. What's wrong with you? What's wrong is that the incentive structure is all messed up. So the funny thing is, if you pay a small fee, then you're obligated to go to the class. You're like, oh, well, I spent $5, so I might as well go on that Wednesday where I'm not doing anything. Whereas if you didn't pay anything, nothing gained, nothing lost either. So people would just stay home. And then instructors need to be paid too, because then they're not going to show up. So then you've got like these students that paid for a class, and an instructor is teaching for free, and the instructor didn't show up. And if the instructor is the only person with a key card, you have an angry mob that you can see over the webcam, like outside your space, like banging on the door, like that scene in Clerks. It's beautiful. And then, of course, there are costs for everything, right? Lighting, just to a bare minimum. The lights turned on, that's about like $5, you know, whatever. this was more or less trial and error. One thing that I found by doing classes in many different ways was most people are going to go to an easy introductory class where they're going to get something tangible. It doesn't even matter what that thing is. They're like, button stamping 101, you know, I stamped a button, you know, I got something cool, I paid $30 for that class. Like, that works. But if you have a series where you're like, first you're gonna stare at the button and then you will stamp it in class 2, you know, that doesn't work so well because no one shows up to class 2. They're like, I spent that entire class just looking at buttons and I didn't learn anything. We didn't actually have a class like that. That was an example. This one, again, the cleaning of the space is very important. We still haven't quite figured out the incentives on that one yet. This is all trial and error, but we do try different things. But especially keeping the churn of the projects moving is important. What typically happens is if you have any kind of an open table, it will be filled with stuff. And so at some point you need to move that stuff. Like that's sort of like a golden, invariant of a hackerspace. It's like, is this table clear? It will be filled with stuff. I don't care what it is. So then this is kind of weird. This is like a unique problem to hackerspaces. And this happens so often, we came up with a term for it called the mimetic infection. And these are folks that show up to your hackerspace. And no, this happens. Like, I don't know, like this does not happen in like a public space, but this happens in a hackerspace for some reason. I've never been anywhere on Earth except for Freeside where this happens.
Obama's a piece of cloth.
Yes, which that website is down, and that made me so sad.
This is the
What?
description.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one that like irritates me the most, like everything here is easy to deal with. The free energy people are kind of funny because they're like, I saw this YouTube video and I wanted to come here and show it to everybody, you know. And I'm like, yeah, that marble is definitely moving around that. But the hackathon to me is like the worst because like a hackathon is a company that's like, well, we have sort of some dumb ideas and we want to throw some free labor at it. So here's some pizza and like go, and you know you get like awesome results. So enough on that. I have like actual emails I can show to individuals, and if you don't believe me that this happens. This is after 2 years, this was like one of the most important lessons I learned, was do not make every single person happy. Eventually you will, in some way or another, but don't make that your goal. You have to make users happy, and you have to make a class of person happy. And these are the 4 people that I try to make happy. This might vary from hackerspace to another, but one critical thing to note is a hobbyist that needs equipment and not space. This is very critical. I had an open house night where I was giving a tour and I was letting everybody know, you know, what our capabilities are and blah, blah, blah. And this dude walks around and he's like looking around like this and puts his hands on his hips and goes, yep, I could definitely see myself building my Cessna here. I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, like you cannot install your plane inside the middle of the space. Like this is not gonna happen. So, you know, you want to cater to a certain type of hobbyist. The hobbyist that wants to use tools and learn how to use them. Students that want new skills, enthusiasts for a thing, and an artist that wants to make something awesome. These are the 4 people that I talk to. Everyone else, I do different things. I'm usually not mean, let's put it that way. This is sort of like, this is where the presentation will go off the rails, because these are just my own opinions based on the trends I'm seeing and kind of like the direction of where I think this hackerspace movement thing is going. For starters, it's not going to solve education. Everyone's saying it's the next thing in K through 12 education, and I'm just like, well, no, that's terrible. That's not going to happen. You know, So this is more focused on problems of the future.
Actually,
So-
I have to ask a question here. Being an education professor, I have to ask, why do you think this is not the future of pedagogy?
Because they think it's too easy, is the first answer that comes to mind. Most of the educators that I've spoken with seem to believe that if we put 3D printers on a food truck and label it a moving makerspace and roll it into a high-income, privileged neighborhood preschool, that we will solve the education problem in this country. And your eyes are like, you're like, whoa. Yeah, and that's just not the way it works. This is a really thorny, complicated issue that's multifaceted and like touches on issues of class and race and like, you know, we could go all day talking about like how to actually fix education, but I can assure you it's not 3D printers on a truck at the end of the day. Or even like bringing back shop class, you know. Good luck with that, because those same privileged folks that want shop class will want you to install a saw stop, or you know, they're not going to let anybody do anything fun. That's one of the key reasons that Freeside's 18 and up. There's a K through 12 hackerspace that opened up in Atlanta that's doing very well. It's going to get super well funded. Half their money went into a saw stop. That's, if you're not familiar with this is a table saw. There's videos of this where like, you know, you take a hot dog, and like, this is a really expensive use of a hot dog, but you can take a hot dog and like put it on the table saw and it will come to a stop, so it won't actually cut the hot dog. The implication being that the hot dog's like a finger if you were like using a table saw. So that's really cool, but like it costs several $1,000s to like replace the blade or whatever when that happens. So in any case, like I could like privately tell you all of my things, although I pretty much laid it out there.
Thank you.
You know, yeah, awesome. Is that satisfactory a little bit, or?
For a panel answer, yes, because I don't expect panel answers to be necessarily detailed, but at least to address the surface level concerns the question originally was probing.
Yeah, I mean it's a highly political thing too. You know, like I don't know, like there are days where running the hackerspace, I ask myself, why did I suddenly become responsible to educate all of Atlanta's youth? You know, and so if the answer to that question is no, you know, I'm not responsible. So I'm just some guy that happens to run a hackerspace. So yeah, I have kind of two views, and this is sort of stuff that's been echoed recently, is that the future holds for itself kind of like a simultaneous utopia dystopia. These are the good things about the future. These are the not so good things about the future. And I was sort of what drives my philosophy for how I think about a hackerspace and like where the trend goes. Looking back, the first inklings of this type of notion came with communes. So there's a bunch of communes. I'm especially fond of the Freetown Christiana commune.
This summer.
Cool. Was it cool that they have the giant rock that they rolled in front of the?
That wasn't famous. I don't remember a giant rock.
I think they've kind of mellowed out about it. They've kind of come to terms that it's just going to happen there, and like they're just going to chill out.
Sort of. I mean, I was intrigued. Like they don't really make anything public there. But I had gone to one of the small staircases and just climbed up to like the third floor of one of their buildings, and then saw the stuff happen. Not like Pusher Street or stuff like that, but like people were actually building things.
Yeah.
So
you know, that was like really cool. You know, hack the society, that concept. And then we have like what I call like the culture jamming era. You had like Suicide Club and Cacaphony Society, and that kind of all culminated with Burning Man and kind of died with it too. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's what you make of it, right? But this was sort of like culture hacking, right? Negative Land and other artists that kind of explored this concept, like culture jamming.
And we're participating on their show this weekend.
You're kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, he does, the Over the Edge Halloween
Yeah,
show.
I listened to that.
And you can actually call in and,
Yeah.
contribute to Negative Land this. Yeah.
Can I be part of that, please?
We'll find Drew and he'll look you up.
Right on. So it brings up an interesting point. The more I read about this stuff, the more these threads are interwoven. It makes you feel like part of the cosmos. In any case, and then we get into this InfoSec era, and you have you guys all know this is hack the computers. But what's interesting about this, society, culture, computers, and now we're in hack all the things, right? It's kind of an interesting progression, right? You start with society, this lofty, ambitious goal that's not going to happen, and then you go to culture, and then you have computers, and then things, right? Because all things are computers now. Yes?
Yeah, I live about 15 miles from the farm there, that's listed on your slide there. I've met a bunch of those people, and I just thought you'd like to know that all that land that they had has now been split up and is owned privately and individually by the various founders.
Yeah.
That all the original ideals, were found to be unwieldy.
Yeah. I mean, for that concept.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody's interested, I can tell you quite a bit about what they did and how it was formed and how it fell apart.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the challenge in any shared system. I mean, if you think about it, that's just even a microcosm of the United States itself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the United States is a fractured
Oh,
mess.
yeah. A lot of people, have the feeling that the United States is real solid and is going to be there forever, and they don't realize how young it is. And how fragile.
Just the death throes of an empire. That's all. But yeah, so I just like this progression, is what I'm trying to say. I like the idea that somewhere along the way, society and culture became equated with the technology, and if you think about it, that's the entire fabric of our society and culture now is technology. So, really, has anything really changed? So, I think that the next era in how hackerspaces will evolve is two things. I think this makerspace K-12 thing is a fad. It's going to go away, just like any sort of educational salvo thing. But what's really going to stick around, or what's the next iteration, is going to be going back to that society and culture, because we saw society and culture trend into technology, and now technology is trending back to society and culture, and so activism is actually going to mean something instead of slacktivism. So I think we're going to see people try to, especially in light of the NSA and privacy, I think people are going to try to work towards restoring some kind of a balance there. Maybe we've crossed, some line that we'll never be able to get back to, but I don't believe that. So it'll be interesting to see what this model has as far as an impact on greater society and culture and how we organize, right? Because we're so connected and spread out over the world now. And then biohacking. This is actually going to be huge. We're getting into sort of embedded and wearable devices and that sort of thing, and we really there's no way to predict how that's going to fall out. We have no idea of what effect that's going to have on people and their relationships. And maybe these two things are related, right? Maybe they're both two sides of the same thing. People pushing their own personal boundaries, and then in turn those things pushing on society itself. So, I just went through a few random scenarios, pretty much if you've seen any movie based off Philip K. Dick, I'm pretty sure that stuff's going to happen. And I think that some hackerspaces will play a role in filling gaps in problems that people have that society can't meet, which is sort of what we're seeing now. The problem that I see now, one thing that drives people to a hackerspace is that they do not have the creative outlet or space in which to express creativity and do their own research and think about their own stuff within their day-to-day lives. And that's what's drawing them to the hackerspace. And I see people that drive 50 miles to come to Freeside. And they're not coming there because we have working 3D printers. I assure you don't. They come there because we have a culture that's giving people a space for which to express themselves creatively. So, you know, our whole notion of work needs to change, but yeah, that sort of thing. This is something that I'm heavily interested in. I like open source hardware. I like this concept. I like the idea of being able to manufacture some hardware that is verifiable and that you've manufactured yourself. Right now we have lots of cheap hardware that comes to us from all over the world. We have no idea how it's put together, and there's no way to really verify that that stuff is secure. Maybe some of this privacy stuff makes us rethink that approach, and we'd be interested in more local, homegrown pipelines for developing this sort of stuff. And people are working on it. Those are at least a couple of good projects there. I like this thing. That was my favorite thing from that movie. But basically, like, sort of like a non-weapon suit. So yeah, that's what I want to close it on. That's it.
Reminiscent of Microsoft's 1995 Where Do You Want to Go Today?
I did not
Thank
think
you.
about it. I did not think about that. So yeah. Questions? Stump the hacker?
If you could join any hippie commune, which would you join?
If I could join any hippie commune. There's actually there's a space outside of Reno that opened up that is not like a commune. I don't think they actually have living space, but they're an extremely large facility that's open year-round to develop giant art for Burning Man. And I think that would be awesome. I don't know if they have artists in residence that just, I mean, I would imagine if you're working that hard on something year-round, then, you know, yeah.
Building on that, earlier you said that the, oh goodness, the InfoSec sort of ethic had gone to Burning Man and died there. What did you mean by that?
I don't know. I mean, no, I think what I was saying that what died there, I think like, I think to an extent, the notion that we can pull off, I think it was touching on something that he said, which was, you know, this notion that like, we can actually live together, like the fact that that notion is dead, I think it's just out of style, if that makes sense. Like, people, I don't think, believe that anymore. Or at least a good portion of them certainly don't believe that it's possible to live together with people.
And again, they kind of had problems with New Harmony, which was the commune in Indiana in the 1840s or so.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you have Robert Owen's utopian kind of exercises when he came to America.
Well, so that's a huge difference between those experiments and hackerspaces, because the main large experiment is that a hackerspace is not trying to prove something. Communes in the past, even like, well, take any commune. I mean, we had, you know, communist communes, you had like Christian communes, you had all sorts of stuff, right? Like any spectrum of like thing. But what they were trying to do was they were trying to prove that their utopia was correct. And that's not what a hackerspace, hackerspaces don't really have those goals. Like on the whole, if you could identify like, what is the goal of these hackerspaces? What are they trying to do to us? We don't really have that, right? We have just like play. We just have exploration. And I think that's really good. I think it's good to not go back to that. Not try to force a utopia, if that makes sense.
It does, although I'm kind of wondering, there's this intentional absence, I've noticed, of an ideology, although it makes me tempted to already try to find a ideology that might not be verbally expressed, but one that is inherent in the assumptions that are under the system. I mean, you could argue that information wants to be free as an ideology, or we should make these sorts of alternative attempts to cultivate hardware in ways that better suit us as sort of an ideology, but it's not certainly the all-encompassing socio-cultural kind of ideology that you would have found in these more overarching kind of utopian spaces that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I also think that like part of the purpose of a hackerspace is kind of to figure that out for the community that it's operating in. So if you want to develop a community of, say, preppers, that's going to be a very different space from a community of people who want to be artists. So while those spaces are going to have similar tools and similar ambitions and similar growth and similar issues, clearly those mini societies and cultures are going to develop in totally different directions.
There are two. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No.
So there are two pretty successful hackerspaces in Huntsville.
Yeah.
The Makers 256.
Yeah.
And then the MindGear Labs. And they both are there for different reasons. And
Yeah.
people that are members say we go to the Makers for the ideas. We go to MindGear to build it. And
Yeah.
They have commercial laser cutters and CNC machines and things.
And the cool thing about that is that, like for me, like Makers Local is definitely like one of those inspirations for me for Freeside, because it reminds me that we can keep growing. I forget just exactly how many members Makers Local has. I think I've heard between 40 and 60.
It's almost 80.
Almost 80. So see, like Freeside's sitting at 60 and we live in Atlanta, and that's like how many more times the population, right? But that speaks to a certain extent of the problem of geography, right? Atlanta just being way too spread out. But still, I mean, there's no reason, right? Or at least there shouldn't be. But that always makes me sort of examine, well, what are some of my own blind spots with respect to that? So it just reminds me, like, looking at spaces like that, and even in places that are even smaller than Huntsville, they still have the same type of, like, membership numbers and, like, people that really support that community. So those are the spaces I really kind of look under the microscope and, like, what makes you guys tick? And in all cases, it's that people are really, really tight. They're really good to one another, and they really care, and they want to try to teach everybody. And, you know, that.
There are very few anthropological constants that hold across all human societies, but the 30/7 rule that you came out remarkably holds up across humanity, and it drives cultural anthropologists nuts, because we're always looking at the differences between societies. Finding one of those constants just makes us want to pick it apart. We still haven't found a good way to do it. So the rule still stands.
Yeah. No, it definitely does. And we actually took that into account when we were trying to design our sort of our organizational structure. We've tried a hierarchy because we were inspired by Rick Falkvinch's Swarmwise book, which touched on those topics. And so we're like, well, if it worked for the pirate party, it should work for us, right? But the thing is, like, there's a fundamental difference there. And I think that that's sort of organized for a singular purpose, right? It's to get people elected. And if we were to really try to engineer a distributed approach, we just got to play with that. So I've had some ideas, and we're about to get a new board actually in like 4 days at Freeside. So however that shakes out, with those folks, we're going to try to work with them and see if we can come up with sort of a new model for organizing the space and getting stuff done. Because hierarchy is not working, mostly because we're at this weird growth juncture where maybe you guys ran into this problem at Makers Local, but we grew to this size, and we're big enough to start having the big problems from size, but we're not large enough to have enough leaders come in and fill the roles we need in order to manage those problems. So that's kind of an interesting obstacle. Like, it's almost like I sound like a broken record sometimes, because I'm like, let's just keep adding numbers until like it just fixes itself, you know? Even though I know that's not the right answer, like, it's just like trying to throw large numbers at the problem. So.
Is there a magic ratio of leaders to people that you could insert here?
I don't know. I really just do not know the answer to that. I think it really isn't a ratio so much as it is engineering a system. And one example would be like distributing management of events, right? That's something that's typically run by one person at Freeside now, me. And I've been taking aims to try to get that spread out to people. And that's, you know, you have to do that in a way that's accountable, that doesn't stop people from doing it, and make it easy for them, but don't make it too easy so they don't do things. So, yeah, it's tricky. It's a lot of trial and error. So, thank you.
I think you touched on this just a little while ago, and to clarify, and it ties into what you're talking about the culture. The culture is really the key part, the thing that you really, it's the main attractor. And that kind of forms around, if I'm hearing correctly, that kind of forms or tends to form around the capital that you have. If someone has a 3D printer and then the person is interested in a 3D printer, well, they will form some sort of organization around that activity that by its nature will kind of produce a particular mindset that they share.
Yeah, we call those the gift of the Magi moments. It's, you know, like the classic example was we had an open house Tuesday night, and one guy was like, I have an internet connected coffee maker. And some other guy, he's like, but I don't know how to write software for it. Another guy's like, well, I have coffee and I know how to write that software. You know, and they got married. I mean, like, the one thing that we are focusing on, at least for this coming year, is we divide our space into different zones of activities, but now we're going to try to see if I can get people excited about chaining those into pipelines. So one pipeline that we have is we have a couple of people that are really interested in cosplay. Dragon Con and the movie industry is getting huge in Atlanta. So, well, Dragon Con has been huge. But these folks make a living doing this. So they were talking about, well, let's have 3D printing of masters, mold making, and then doing casting copies of those. And I'm like, that sounds awesome, because you touch on so many different tools. And people that go through that tool chain will learn so much along the way. So that's kind of like one approach we're taking to that.
But a quick follow-up to that, I like the pipelines of interactivity. Where do you think maybe a software group or some sort of like web development group kind of fits into a hackerspace, or is that a separate thing?
So
can that scale out?
So one of the nasty truths about a hackerspace is that it's filled with software developers and IT folks, and nobody wants to work on software because that's their day job. And the sad thing is you still need to, because while the nature of your projects that you're building is very different, you still need that software expertise and knowledge to actually execute on those projects. Whether even it's just like I don't know if you guys saw the Crimson Abyss talk today, but he was talking about how he didn't have the skills to like pull down the data from KML, and he had to manually copy stuff over by hand. Well, I see folks that Freeside is actually lucky in that we do have like some people that aren't from software backgrounds. I would say about a good 60% of our members are, though, exclusively software developers with zero construction and building and making skills, and then we have fabricators. So that's really hard to do, especially like if your space is entirely founded by software developers. Freeside started out that way. It was a bunch of Google folk and a lot of like software developer friends that they knew, and that quickly did not work. Also, I didn't know what they were trying to do either, because at one point it was like a shared workspace, or at some point too it was just supposed to be like a hacking lab, like in the style of Loft or Cult of Dead Cow, that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think like sort of not having that focus and vision is also kind of like a big part of it. But I know that like as far as culture goes too, like I think one weird thing that's happened is we haven't been able to set up a pipeline to do printed circuit boards, because certain members that are into that, they have pipelines where they take their designs and ship them to China and then get boards manufactured and sent back. They don't feel like they want to bring that to Freeside, because then they feel like, well, maybe I'm going to get more people doing this stuff and they'll compete with me. Like, they're not probably going to make the same product you're doing. So that's kind of like a weird thing. And so we get like resistance on doing certain things because people feel like that threatens them. It's odd. So.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
and I'll hand over the microphone in a second. But on that note, what do you think the healthy balance between a hackerspace or makerspace and business forces is? I mean, how do you manage that? You guys have been around for a while, so.
Yeah. I take a very I don't know that it's popular, but I do definitely have an opinion on that. I feel like, and this translates to how I run the space, I feel like a nonprofit space is a nonprofit space, and it should operate in that context. If people want to make money, a nonprofit hackerspace is a really terrible place to do that in. That said, well, for one reason, like let's take intellectual property. If you were actually running a machine shop where people had intellectual property concerns, a hackerspace is poorly equipped for you to do that. You know, you need to have like a security system, you probably need offices. All that infrastructure to protect intellectual property starts adding up and is very costly. So while I don't tell people that they can't do that stuff at Freeside, I tell them you're probably better off doing open source stuff, just because then there's no worry about, okay, well, who's going to profit off this? And you can still profit off of open source software anyways, so it's kind of like a moot. But I think like, I talked recently to one of the directors of Family Lab and Sunshine Labs over in Orlando, and she said that what they do is, it's sort of like a symbiotic relationship, which I guess, I forgot who said about the two different hackerspaces in Huntsville. I guess that was you, right? The different, you have like the commercial space and then, it's gone now.
But it's the Makers Local 256, and then there's a little place called Mind Gear, which is,
it's a commercial space, right?
they're separate things, very much.
But I mean, that's good though, because what you kind of want is, I think you want to be in an environment where people who already know what they're doing don't dominate it. So I think the model of a gym is terrible. I don't want to see a hackerspace as a gym, because a gym, by definition of that business model, serves a few, whereas a hackerspace should serve everybody. Oh my God, you people look so drunk. You should get in here right away. Excellent, come on in. Oh, okay. Oh, he'll be fine.
This one, the future, and you've got L cards? I'm okay with this. What do we miss? Sorry.
As we like to say at Freeside, the only limit is yourself.
Correct.
So yeah, I don't know, anything else? I'm more or less done. I'm just having fun.
Can you go back to that slide about the dystopian aspects?
Yeah.
And his slides are on the website. Go to
Yeah.
PhreakNIC website.
Very good.
Yeah, this is like a publicly shared Google thing. This may or may not necessarily apply to the US, but it will definitely apply in other countries, especially that last point of denial of opportunities. And even if it doesn't apply to the US, it could also be really hard to prove that an employer is doing that. So, just some stuff I read about. Nothing new.
Well, on that note,
Thank you. Thank you guys for being patient also.